All right, we're going to talk about your assignment A3 construction scheduling for a little bit here. So on your EduCat page, if you pull that A3 up, it's going to explain a little bit more about what you're going to be doing. So generally speaking, you're going to be giving a set of plans and specs for the Staybridge Hotel project in Marquette, Michigan. So all that stuff is in here. If you open up that folder, I broke them out into individual sets because they were quite large of a set of plans, and then the overall spec book as well. So feel free to download those and use those. You're going to need them for this assignment anyways. Back into the assignment here. So it's going to be done in two parts. You're first going to look through the plans. You're going to create a construction schedule for all of your construction activities based on a project start date of April 10th, 2023 and a substantial completion date of April 19th, 2024. So that is your parameter. Then you have to, you as the CM at risk, have to figure out all the different things that you need to incorporate to get us to that completion date based on that start. Along with that, you have a couple minimum requirements for headings. So if you're using project schedule, your activity ID is something that automatically generates when you pop it up. You'll have a task name, duration, start, finish, predecessors, successors, and resources. So those are your section headings. So it looks something kind of like this. Generically, when you have a new project, you have a task mode as well, which you should always click on this, go from manual to auto. So that every time you type in new tasks, we just say mobilization, it automatically generates this. So you can leave all this stuff, that's fine. You just want to make sure you have the duration, the start, the finish, predecessors, right? If I want to add a new one, I'm just going to insert a column for my successors. I'll just scroll down here, right? So we add that, we have resources, all that kind of stuff. So as you start building out your first day of the project schedule, right, project start date, that's where we're starting mobilization, right? And your substantial completion date is April 19th. I do not want to see on the first part of this any pre-construction stuff other than mobilization, right? And for your project closeout stuff, I don't want to see anything besides an actual substantial completion date because we have additional activities you can add into it beyond that for your part two. Again, use your Excel resources if you don't remember how to do some of these things, like adding, I showed you how to add a new task as auto scheduled. Make sure you have, you're planning out in days, which is a default, right? Your work week is 5-day work week. We have holidays fit in there, so we don't plan for those days. And then for this one, I want you to do a minimum of 200 tasks. Might sound like a lot. Your project size and scope might sound like a lot, but it's really, once you start getting used to scheduling, it becomes a lot quicker because you will notice there's a lot of repetitive activities too. So in general, a project like this probably has more than 1,000 activities, but it's tough to really, without actually having the project and people to work with, to get that level of detail. So we're going to keep it at 200 for this. The big thing is understanding how to utilize summary tasks, and just a quick refresher on how to do that. So if we want to do, say, like site work is an option, is a pretty typical one. So maybe day one we have like clear and grub, right? All you have to do to make site work your summary task is click on the items underneath it, and you just simply click over using this button up here, the indent task. So that just now made site work one of your summary tasks, right? So you can do all that kind of stuff. You can just say basic, excavation or whatever you want to put. It's going to automatically then generate all these all the way through. We'll put retaining walls in there at some point. We'll do fine grading. Obviously, jumping around quite a bit here, but just to give you an example. So if you want to get out of your summary task then, right, the next item down, maybe this will be like building structure. All you have to do is click on this one, use the out dent button, and it'll move it back, right? So we can start talking about foundations, right? Take this, move it back over, and there you have it, right? And at any point you can start adding other things too, right? So you can start with just having your 5 summary tasks and then just adding items in just like you would in Excel, right? So if I want to add an item here, I just say insert task and here's a new task, right? So I can just put, oops, I don't like doing it that way, I like doing it this way, but there's multiple ways you can do it. So if I want to add backfill or something like that as a task. So pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I'm already up to, how many items is this? 9 items. And we've only been talking here for a minute. So 200 shouldn't be that hard. As we keep going, though, understanding that summary tasks is kind of the big way to sequence your work. So the way I always look at bigger projects, and I'll pull up the set of plans here for you. All right, so this is the project you're going to be overall, that you're going to be scheduling. Civil set's kind of important to understand some of what's going on. I always think it's a really good idea to use like Google Maps or something to see what the area around it looks like, so you get a good idea of logistics, because the sequencing is going to affect how you start your project, right? And then obviously utilizing the architectural set is kind of the biggest one for like visualizing how to actually build the schedule out. So once we start getting into different floor plans, let's see, what's a good one here. Now can you use one of these? Let's see. So as we're looking through different areas, as this is the first floor plan, right? So first floor, second floor, third floor, fourth floor. Everything's very similar from one floor to the next. You do have to understand there's some differences throughout, right? But you're going to get probably a little bit less detail as you go up. So the nice part about doing something like a hotel or apartment or something that has a lot of repetition is if we can figure out, say for instance, like this type A queen bed room, and we have a good idea of sequence there, and then we can take maybe an idea of this for a king bed suite that we have, right? This type B room, we're just going to figure that one out, and we're going to multiply it as we go through and just keep adding onto the schedule, right? So instead of looking at a entire project as like, how am I going to figure out how to do all this stuff, really break it down into sections. Utilize your summary tasks, figure out what makes the most sense sequentially, as far as like, where am I going to start this project, where do I want to finish this project, and then look at big picture items first, and then start breaking it down into smaller items as you go. Because if you can start doing that, it makes it, it takes all of this stuff and really breaks it down to, well, I'm really just looking at like this room, say 50 times, right? And then some of these different areas, right, where we have all of our means of egress, so our stairs and our elevators and our core and shell work gets done, then we can bump into more of our architectural stuff. So look at it from big picture first before you start adding in a ton of detail. Otherwise, you might start overthinking things too much, and then it becomes a lot more challenging to figure out how to do your schedule. Also, you have to do 3 milestones within your schedule. Those can be up to you, right? So if you want to do something like building enclosure date, substantial completion should be on there, right? Different things. Quite honestly, you probably have more than 3, but just want to make sure you know how to do milestones, which is just basically a 0-day activity. Then a couple printing setup things. You're not going to need to print this, but it's important to understand how to set those up so you know that when you do go to print or print a PDF, you don't have like 20 pages wide trying to look through a Gantt chart. So I mentioned a couple of these things throughout, but just basic considerations for scheduling big projects. Right, take a look at Google Maps, take a look at some sort of layout of the surrounding area, try to get a feel for what you're dealing with first and the area around you to see, what kind of makes sense, what kind of grade issues you might have, what kind of, just ability to access the site you might have, right? So those kind of things will sort of dictate the way you sequence. After that, I generally go into like big milestones and summary tasks to sort of help organize thoughts. So if this is, say, a $20 million project, it seems like an awful lot of work, but you can really break it down by area and make it a little bit simpler, right? So then we're talking different areas, different sequencing things, right? So our structure and our civil stuff is going to lead us into how we're actually going to then finish out the building. So it's good to understand how that works first, getting a good idea from maybe my site contractors, my foundation contractors, my structural steel contractors to see like what makes the most sense for them, because then that will help obviously resequence everything, along with like how do we factor in lead times, how do we do all that kind of stuff to make most sense so we're making the most efficient use of our schedule. And then another, just remember, a lot of finishing sequences become very repetitive. So as we get like sort of the big picture and sort of figure out the overall sequence of what we want to do, then we can really start diving down into detail, and then figuring out small individual areas and multiplying those. Um, some of the things that are important to understand is there are all oftentimes what I would call soft task items. So they're not the hard task things. They're not the actual physical work being done per the plans and specs. They're things like temporary activities, things that come up because of weather, things that come up because they're incidental or they're an accessory of something else, right? So an example would be like temp fencing. An example would be like crane pads or moving different leading edge type stuff throughout our projects, because oftentimes we will have open leading edges that are temporary activities for guardrails, and then we have to move those kind of things. So it's hard to determine when and where that's all going to happen, but at some point you're going to have different temporary activities that take place that have to be moved. They're cost items. A lot of times they're cost prohibitive items, but they're necessary for your project to take place. So those are tough to deal with a lot of times, but it's important to understand that there are soft tasks that take place. And the other thing I always try to not focus on so much is actual completion dates. I want to, the way I like to build schedules is just figuring out sequence, seeing how things work, understanding, if durations make sense, understanding that general relationships make sense, and then see where that gets me. Because a lot of times you're going to build out the schedule and you might end up like 4 months early based on what the substantial completion date is. And then you'll have to really rethink, like, what did I miss here? Because we're not getting that done so soon, right? And that'll help you start sparking ideas of where do we think my durations are incorrect, my relationships are incorrect. Just there's a lot of different things like that. And more often than not, you're going to end up with duration. Well, I guess in my history, I've ended up with overshooting that substantial completion date and then coming back to readjust a lot of the relationships to start adding lag times and stuff like that. Okay, so you're going to be submitting this as a Microsoft project into your A3.1 portal, which looks something like this. Okay, so that's where you submit that. For your second part, you're going to get into pre-construction activities, so make sure to take another good look at your pre-construction scheduling PowerPoint here that I've provided on EDUCAT for you. And then add these parameters in. So you're utilizing design phases, bidding phases, critical submittal phases, and procurement phases, right? So you're gonna have 4 individual summary tasks for all these. You are a CM at risk on this project, so a lot of this stuff might start overlapping because you're gonna be involved in all these design phases. You're gonna have 3 bid packages involved in this project. So a lot of this stuff might overlap then with when you're actually doing the work. So you're gonna have repeat activities throughout. Is very likely. Your critical submittals, I just listed several items that you have to include on your project. Under procurement, you need to have lead times for each of these items under your submittals. We're gonna have to have final GMP date, notice commencement date, your key permits. We're gonna obviously have a couple that have to be involved, but I'll let you guys take a look and make sure you can see what kind of other permits you might need for a project like this. And then having pre-start meetings for all of these project teams. All right, so your civil and structural will have to be obviously quite early. MEPs will have to be pretty early. Building enclosure, maybe not so early, and it's going to include a lot of these companies as well. And then architectural finishes, you're obviously not even going to be into this by the time you're building the project because you're going to have your bid package 1 issued well in advance of bid package 3. So once you get done with all of that, you're going to have to link your activities in pre-con into your construction activities. And then once you're done with that, you have your 10 activities or so in project closeout. Actually, I think there's more than that, but these are just obviously things that a lot of times get overlooked because everyone's excited about the end result of the project. Owners are excited to get in, and people forget that we need to actually do a lot of these other things too. So this is a little more straightforward, so I'm not going to go into much detail there. And your grading rubric is provided. So a little bit generic again, but just making sure you hit all the minimum requirements and have good logic and sequencing throughout, and you're hitting your dates. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out.